when the original immigrants are dying off, and their children are sort of reclaiming that connection to immigrant parents. And we'll show another clip from a Steven Spielberg film that was actually made for children, An American Tale, which is about a family of Russian Jewish mice who come to the United States as immigrants. And this song sort of shows their hopefulness for what they'll find in the United States. The film actually begins with a Cossack attack on a Jewish village, and as a pogrom. And while the humans are being attacked by the Cossacks cats attack the mice. And it's an allegory presented for children about the experience of Jews in Russia before the USSR and the prevention of pogroms.
I didn't see any cats.
Won't it be nice to get to America where we don't have to worry about cats anymore? There are no cats in America. But back home in Mother Russia, our family was traveling through the snow to Minsk. Suddenly Papa saw those huge paw prints. When I heard him screaming, I fainted dead away. And I woke up an orphan. Oh, yeah.
But there are no cats in America, and the streets are paved with cheese. Oh, there are no cats in America, so set your mind at ease.
La cosa terribile che esiste nella patria mia. Do you think that things were bad in Russia? You should see things in my country. The times were hard in Sicily. We had no provolone. The dog, he was attacked with a taste for my brother Tony. When Mama went to plead for him, the dance he would see her. We found her rosary on the ground. Poor Mamma mia. But
there are no cats in America, and the streets are paved with cheese. Oh, there are no cats in America, so set your mind at ease.
Sad, but sadder still. When I was but a lad, I lost my true affair. A calico, he caught us by surprise. In a flash of teeth and fur, her tail was all he left of her. 'Neath the heather is wedded to rise.
But there are no cats in America, and the streets are paved with cheese. Oh, there are no cats in America, 'cause there are no cats in America, 'cause there are no cats in America, there are no cats in
Little toe tapper, it also shows this mentality of the hopes that immigrants had before coming to America. However, unlike films that might depict the immigrant experience in the 40s and 50s, where you came to America and made something of yourself, they find it very difficult when they get to the United States because they're not given the opportunities that they think they will. They're still prejudiced. There's a very poignant scene where one of the mice on Ellis Island has her name changed, which, while we know now that didn't necessarily happen, there's a very popular narrative in the United States that once family arrived at Ellis Island, they were giving a new American name, which didn't necessarily happen. Sometimes it was just difficult for the people writing their names in the registry to spell Eastern European and Central European names. So sometimes parts would be dropped, letters would be added, but it criticizes the United States in some way for how it failed early immigrants. But again, the family survives, they prevail, and they eventually, in a sequel, move out west, where they're actually quite successful, which in another way sort of mirrors this Jewish experience in entertainment of going west for freedom, mirroring their arrival in the United States from Eastern Europe. And then last but not least, contemporary Jewish film. So Jewish identity is openly depicted. There's lots of Jewish celebrities who people know are Jewish. Comedians like Phyllis Diller, Roseanne Barr, and the incomparable Joan Rivers are openly Jewish and make references to being Jewish in their comedy. There's still the Coen brothers, for example. So Joel and Ethan Coen, who are very, very recognized, famous directors in the United States, make films that have very little to do with Jewish experiences and the Jewish narrative. They actually have an interest in American Protestantism. It's a recurring theme in their films of vigilante justice and solving your own problems and having a very staunch sense of right and wrong that they feel identifies the American experience. The Holocaust and the State of Israel are still very popular themes, and films such as The Wolf of Wall Street, The Social Network, and Transamerica all center on characters who are Jewish. And in terms of Holocaust film, the depiction has changed from depicting the Holocaust to revising the narrative of the Holocaust and depicting post-Holocaust generations. So one such film is Everything is Illuminated, in which Elijah Wood goes to Ukraine to find the village where his grandfather grew up, and the grandfather who eventually survived the Holocaust, but he's trying to reconnect with his Jewish roots in the Ukraine. So this is just a scene from that.
Иди спроси там.
Простите за беспокойство.
Какое беспокойство в такой день?
I'm not sure where the subtitles are, but
Вы откуда?
Из Одессы.
В Одессе я не бывала.
Обязательно надо побывать. А вы слыхали про местечко под названием Трачендово? Мне сказали, это где-то здесь рядом.
just one second to try to get this.
Простите, я не хотел бы отнимать у вас время. Вы слыхали про Трачендово?
I'm not sure the subtitles are, but just an explanation of the scene. My Ukrainian is a little rusty, but so.
It's Russian, actually.
Oh, it's Russian. Never stop learning. So the I'm not totally. So the premise of the scene is he's looking for the village, and this woman lived in the village and actually was the one who saved his grandfather's life. But the film deals a lot with memory and living in the wake of the Holocaust for the offsprings of survivors in the United States. Let's go to the next clip. And so another thing that's going to come into play is depicting World War II in more ambiguous terms. So Ralph Fiennes, who plays Amon Goth in Schindler's List, wins an Academy Award for portraying a Nazi, like one of 3 Americans who's won an Academy Award for portraying a Nazi, the others being Kate Winslet in The Reader, although she's a British actress. And Christoph Waltz, who's Austrian, who appeared in *Inglourious Basterds*, which we're going to look at next. However, when Quentin Tarantino made *Inglourious Basterds*, his intention was to reverse the roles, and instead of portraying Jewish Holocaust victims as victims, he sort of reclaims power and ownership by depicting Jewish American soldiers who go to Germany to assassinate Hitler. So again, Quentin Tarantino is a very quirky director, but it's interesting to see his depiction of Jews during World War II. So we'll look at this short clip. And I hope the subtitles work.
Ich befürchte, dass keiner von Ihnen ein einziges Wort Deutsch spricht. Es sind Freunde aus Italien. Dies hier ist der hervorragende Sensationsdarsteller Enzo Gorloni. Ein sehr talentierter Kameramann, Antonio Margheriti, und Antonios Kameraassistent Dominique De Cocco. Signori, questo è un vecchio amico mio, colonnello Hans Landa della SS.
Buongiorno.
Signori, piacere. Gli amici della vedetta ammirata da tutti noi, questa gemma propria della nostra cultura, saranno naturalmente accolti sotto la mia protezione per la durata del loro soggiorno.
Grazie. Coloni? Lo pronuncio correttamente? Sì, corretto.
Gorlami? Per cortesia, me lo ripeti un po', va?
Gorlami.
Mi scusi, con me?
Gorlami.
Ancora una volta.
Gorlami.
E come si chiama lei?
Antonio Margareti.
Ancora?
Margareti.
Un'altra volta, ma adesso vorrei proprio sentire la musica delle parole.
Margareti. Margheriti. E lei?
Dominic De Cocco.
Come?
Dominic De Cocco. Bravo, bravo.
Ich glaube, meine Kamerafreunde müssen ihre Plätze finden.
Lasciatemi vedere I vostri biglietti. Ich glaube, für einen Star von Ihrem Status wird es nicht allzu schwierig gewesen sein, Premierenkarten für Ihre Freunde zu besorgen.
0023, 0024 non sarà troppo difficile di trovare. Arrivederci.
Arrivederci. Arrivederci. Arrivederci.
So again, there's an element of comedy in the Tarantino film. And they do, in this version of the film, it's sort of controversial because it ends with these Jewish American soldiers assassinating Hitler and blowing up a film that also has Goebbels and Hermann Goering in it and ending the war. And Christoph Waltz wins an award for playing Hans Landa, who knows German, French, Italian, and English fluently, which they weren't anticipating, obviously, that he would be fluent in Italian. Now, there is still this element of criticism about stereotypes, especially when The Wolf of Wall Street came out, which starred Leonardo DiCaprio, Scorsese film, which bordered on pornographic in terms of the content in the film, where there's very explicit depictions of sex, drug use, alcohol abuse, things like that. There was this sort of an outcry by the Jewish community that there's still this trope of the con artist, this Jewish con artist, being a popular image in American film, with Jordan Belfort being Jewish, and his claim to fame being the fact that he swindled a lot of people out of their money. So there's still criticisms about this idea of the Jewish swindler, which we saw in the film from the teens, being portrayed on the American film. And of course, there's still this battle of the stereotype that Jews, quote unquote, run Hollywood. So that's the current state of affairs. Again, Jewish people have a pretty open life in American film. There are films made where the characters just happen to be Jewish, such as Knocked Up, starring Seth Rogen, and This Is Where I Leave You. This Is Where I Leave You is a very recent comedic film starring Jane Fonda and Tina Fey about a Jewish family, a very dysfunctional Jewish family, sitting Shiva for their deceased father. And Knocked Up, which has nothing to do with Judaism at all. However, Seth Rogen, who plays the main male character in that film, is Jewish, and his Jewish identity is brought into the film as sort of an afterthought. And in the films that he's in, he usually plays a Jewish character, including Neighbors, his most recent film, where there's references to him speaking Hebrew throughout the film. But again, it's not front and center. There's still this overwhelming theme of the Holocaust memory, if you're talking about films that are specifically about the Jewish experience. However, there's plenty of films not necessarily about the Jewish experience that still weave aspects of Judaism in throughout. So it's sort of a complicated state of affairs, and goes back into that theme that there's no one Jewish American film. And the rising films from Israel are very popular in the United States. Waltz with Bashir, Get, films like that are very popular with American audiences who, again, there's allyship with the state of Israel and the United States where there's an exchange of culture and ideas. All right, so that concludes a very long, complicated history of Jewish Americans in American cinema. So if anyone has any questions or comments, you can open the floor to that. Yes, Mr. Holman.
Yeah, I joked that I was going to find the hardest question I could possibly find and throw it at you, and that's not at all what I'm going to do. But I do have a question. Particularly, you talked a lot about narratives, and you showed us like a very comprehensive history of film from like the 1920s forward. And I think that's really, really commendable. One area that I'm still questioning a lot about is the meta-narrative created particularly around the images of women through film. So we looked at Mae West and we saw Marilyn Monroe.
Right.
And in both cases it was like this blonde woman who's, you know, kind of coquettish, like very kind of like sexualized in a very, I don't know, prominent fashion. So my question is, do you find that there's only like one kind of narrative around Jewish women? Has that changed over time? What does that look like?
That's an excellent question, because there is this sort of shift where in the early stages where Judaism wasn't necessarily depicted outright, it's more the focus on the Jewish actress. And by and large, these Jewish actresses were very beautiful. And people like Marilyn Monroe, who converted, and Mae West, who Judaism wasn't an essential part of her life, and later Elizabeth Taylor, who converted, had the sex symbol status. And people like Lauren Bacall, another sort of sex symbol, is Jewish, Hedy Lamarr. In terms of motifs in film, I think it is a lot more one-dimensional for women. People criticize Mel Brooks and Woody Allen all the time for how they depict women as sort of being either passive sex objects or shrewish, nagging, overbearing mothers. And I mean, I do think that is something to criticize, because it does appear a lot. It's a lot more one-dimensional and flat for Jewish women. That there's the mom who's overbearing and sort of nags, like we saw in the Woody Allen film, where the mothers always fuss over the sons, the kids are mama's boys, or the women are sort of sultry sex objects, which is, I don't know if it's necessarily a healthy balance, but you do see the rise of people like Madeline Kahn, who's a very, very gifted comedian who appears in Mel Brooks movies and makes her own jokes. However, she does usually appear as a sex symbol. So in Young Frankenstein, she plays the protagonist's rich, glamorous fiance who ends up marrying the monster at the end of the film. But she's sort of a little bit of a vixen throughout the film. And then in Blazing Saddles, she plays this parody of Marlene Dietrich, Lillian von Stupp, where she has Twebble pronouncing her R's, and it's sort of like a gag throughout the film. But even in that film, she's a sex object, and her job is to seduce the sheriff in town and things like that so they can control him. But it is interesting to see, like, the roles of women are not necessarily brought to the forefront, because I think there's still a lot of issues with patriarchal influence in film, and that's an American film problem in general, that there's not as many women writing films or directing films. You mainly bring the women in to act the part. And even in This Is Where I Leave You, the mother, played by Jane Fonda, is very overbearing, and she pries into the son's personal life, and has issues with boundaries and things like that. That's a very common motif that you've seen since the 60s and 70s. So I mean, I think that that's two different topics, like the parts that Jewish women, or the parts, like characters that are Jewish, and actresses who are Jewish. Barbra Streisand is probably the exception, because you have Fanny Brice, who is the center of the story, and she's very popular. She's an American icon, but she's also very beautiful and successful, and doesn't go into that. She's not there for jokes, and if she is there for jokes, she's making the jokes, and it's not about her being ditzy or a sex object. So that would be my commentary on women in American Jewish film, that it's still not on equal footing. I will say that Coen brothers, in their films, they have an overwhelming theme of strong female characters. So in Fargo, the character played by Frances McDermott is a pregnant female cop. So she's very empowered. And then in True Grit, the main character, Maddie Ross, is a 14-year-old girl who goes out into the American West to find the man who killed her father. However, those characters aren't Jewish, but they are written and created by two Jewish men. So it's a little complicated. Yeah, anything else?
You haven't mentioned Charlie Chaplin, I'm afraid.
Oh, Charlie Chaplin. I mean, because he's an English actor, technically, but I mean, he is...
No, but he made many films in the States.
Yes, he did make many films in the States, and he was blackballed and went back to England almost in exile. But he did make the dictator, what was the name of the film, where he portrayed Adolf Hitler in the 1940s. But yeah, he was a very popular comedian and an immigrant. I didn't include him in this just for purposes of he's not. He was very popular in the United States, an icon. But he was a British Jew as opposed to an American Jew. But he did have a very substantial influence, like with films like The Gold Rush and The Kid, and later on. So yeah, I did neglect Mr. Chaplin, but yes, he's a very influential figure. But also not necessarily. I think he sort of falls into the same trope as other earlier stars, who they didn't outwardly depict being Jewish. It was just sort of in their personal lives they were Jewish, but on the film, you wouldn't really know a difference. Mr. Chaplin. Yeah. And there's a very long history of. I included everyone who would be here till 11 o'clock tomorrow morning, but yeah.
Also, you concentrated on directors and actors, but of course other important people like cameramen were of Jewish origin. Also some born here in Wrocław.
Oh really? Who was specific?
I don't remember. It's
Mankiewicz family.
Mankiewicz
Mankiewicz family.
Also, but Schaft or something like that.
But Mankiewicz, they are very famous. His whole family connected with film, American film, and they were born here in Wrocław. Breslau, because it was before the war.
Schuften, I think.
Cameraman. Yeah.
A cameraman and also an architect, decorator.
It is, like, it's so expansive, and again, they're just, I didn't think about everyone, but yeah. So yeah, it's true. Directors and producers and actors, maybe just because I feel like in terms of a cultural understanding, I guess people are going to look more towards the people who are getting the publicity. And it's not fair because films don't make themselves. And people like cameramen and scenic designers and writers tend to get put on the back burner while figureheads get the publicity. But it's also related to how the culture of the United States, the non-Jewish culture, absorbs it and perceives it. So, I don't know, when you look at the Academy Awards, for example, like there's still very common jokes. Like when Christoph Waltz won his Oscar for playing Inglourious Basterds, Steve Martin was hosting the Academy Awards that year. And he was ribbing Christoph Waltz. He says, Christoph Waltz plays a Nazi hunting for Jews. And he said, well, Christoph, and just motions to the audience. And when Ellen DeGeneres gave her speech, which was in the wake of September 11th, she talked about enemies abroad who wanted to get rid of Jews and gays. And she was like, I'm very happy here to be here tonight to celebrate Jews and gays and their contributions to cinema, because without Jews and gay people, there would be no cinema, or anyone named Oscar for that matter, like making a reference about the Academy Awards. So there's that stereotype still that everywhere you go in Hollywood, there's still Jewish people involved, behind the scenes, behind the camera and in front of it. So, yeah. All right. Well, thank you for your time and attention.